Christianity, it's understood that statements about the solitary God are intended to distinguish the Hebraic understanding from the polytheistic view. God has no conflicts within himself. There is no conflict between the different persons of God. When people say that sometimes they think of God the Father and Jesus Christ as two separate beings, that's an incorrect understanding of God's nature. The God of the Old Testament is still the same as the God of the New Testament. Comparing the three in one to Zeus or Athena arguing, or Mars wanting to go to war and Zeus telling him to hold his horses, is a very flawed comparison. God doesn't argue with other facets of himself. There are no other facets. He is complicated, but simply one substance, three persons. The New Testament itself affirms that there is only one God, yet the early Christians were faced with two historical events that revolutionized their understanding of him. First, Jesus came and made claims to be God. If you were a Hebrew and you heard what he said, you couldn't come to any other conclusion than he was claiming to be the God of the Old Testament, personally embodied. And then he was crucified and resurrected from death. Now, resurrections are uncommon, so when they occur, people tend to take notice, particularly because Jesus was resurrected on his own supernatural authority. Concordantly, people came to see there was something special about Jesus. He had to be God. But how could he be God and that not mean there was more than one God? If God was here on earth, who was watching heaven? How could you have God and Jesus God? The second historical event which the early Christians had to reconcile their monotheism with was the arrival of the Holy Spirit. After Jesus shot up into heaven, commonly called the Ascension, he sent another comforter. Believers began to experience the power of this comforter and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. They had all these supernatural incidents, divine healings, miracles, wisdom, and knowledge, which they knew were manifestations of the divine. These things were expressed, felt, and experienced in a completely new way, and yet they knew they were from God. So the early Christians were left with the tension of believing in one God, yet also believing in the divinity of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. The letters of the New Testament, as well as Jesus' words, consistently affirm God's oneness. So out of their experiences, they began wrestling with their theology and came up with the doctrine of the Trinity. The groundwork for this was laid out in John 1, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him are all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Interestingly, the word Trinity is never used in the text of the Bible, yet we might liken it to words like duplicity or duality, words we're familiar with. It would have been a word people knew in that day, and then it became applied in this new way. Because it is so central to Christian doctrine, we often get a sense of weight to it, but we can treat it as a regular word for a second.